r/NoSleep. Have you ever tried the reflection game? It was 2009 when I first read about the reflection game on an obscure forum for urban legends and paranormal enthusiasts. Most people dismissed it as a creepypasta, just another eerie story. But a few users insisted it was real, claiming they'd seen people go through the game and never come back. The post was taken down within hours, and the account that shared it was deleted. Fortunately, someone had saved a copy and reposted it in a hidden corner of the web, warning everyone who stumbled upon it, play at your own risk. They said the game promised to answer any question you had, no matter how difficult or impossible. Whether it was your future, a secret, or a lost memory, if you completed the game, you would know it. But the cost was high. Failure would mean much more than death. Your soul would be trapped in that mirror, staring out into a world that could no longer see you. The risk alone made me hesitate, but I was desperate. I had questions that haunted me every night, questions I needed answers to. My obsession began 2 years ago, when my younger sister disappeared without a trace. She was last seen in our hometown, walking alone one evening, and then, nothing. The authorities came up empty, and after endless leads, my parents gave up, convinced she was gone forever. But I refused to believe it. I had to know what happened to her, even if it meant paying the ultimate price. And so, I decided to play the reflection game. The rules were simple but strict. To begin, you needed to find an old mirror, one that had been used and left abandoned for years. I tracked one down at an antique store outside of town, covered in dust and grime, yet somehow intact. The ritual had to be performed at precisely midnight, alone, in total darkness. And the only thing you could bring with you was a candle and the question you wanted answered. On the night of the game, I sat cross-legged in front of the mirror, a single flickering candle casting shadows across my face. I had written my question on a piece of paper, just as the instructions said, "What happened to my sister?" I held my breath, feeling an unease settle over me as I prepared myself for what was to come. The game begins when you look into the mirror and say your question out loud 3 times, never breaking eye contact with your own reflection. With each repetition, the air grew colder, the candlelight dimmer. By the 3rd time, it felt as though I was staring at someone else entirely, a reflection that was no longer mine. The final rule of the game was this: once you begin, you cannot look away from the mirror until it tells you what you seek. Failure to do so would mean trapping your soul in that other world, locked in the reflection forever. It was a test of endurance and fear. As I stared, my reflection seemed to change, warping ever so slightly until its eyes didn't quite look like mine, and its smile twisted into something unsettling. My heart pounded in my chest, but I couldn't break eye contact. I knew the risks. Then, slowly, my reflection raised a hand and pointed behind me. But in my dim candlelit room, there was nothing there but shadows. I was supposed to ignore anything outside the mirror and only focus on the reflection. My reflection's hand began to beckon, urging me to turn around, but I fought the urge, gritting my teeth as I stayed focused on the glass. The reflection's face twisted into a look of rage, and I felt the room grow even colder. The flame of the candle flickered dangerously, casting long shadows across the walls. And then, suddenly, I heard her voice. "Marcus." It was my sister. I froze, feeling the tears prickling at my eyes. "Marcus, please. Help me." I almost turned around, almost broke the connection, but something held me back. "This isn't real," I reminded myself, even though every fiber of my being wanted to believe it was her. I whispered, "Where are you?" My voice trembled as I waited, eyes locked on the reflection that no longer looked anything like me. Suddenly, the mirror went black. The candle went out, and I was plunged into darkness. My pulse thundered in my ears, but I didn't dare move. After what felt like an eternity, a faint light appeared within the mirror. My own reflection was gone, replaced by a place I'd never seen before, a desolate room, cold and empty, with only one figure standing there. It was my sister. She was pale, her eyes hollow, and her mouth opened in a silent scream. Her hand reached out, fingers pressed against the inside of the mirror as if she were trapped on the other side. "Help me," she mouthed again, her face filled with terror and despair. But that wasn't the worst of it. Because behind her, I saw something moving, a shadow, slinking closer to her, its form impossible to define. It crept up behind her, tendrils reaching out, and I knew in that moment that she was not alone. Whatever it was hunting her, tormenting her in that place beyond the glass. Panic surged through me. I wanted to help her, to pull her out of the mirror, but the rules were clear. I couldn't touch it, couldn't break eye contact. And as I watched, helpless, That shadowy figure wrapped itself around her, pulling her back into the darkness until she disappeared from view. The mirror went dark, and I was left alone in the pitch-black room, my sister's pleas echoing in my ears. When the mirror returned to its original state, I saw myself once more, pale and trembling, my question unanswered. I had failed. My only choice now was to end the game. I took a deep breath, struggling to steady myself as I whispered the words to close the ritual. I had to tear my eyes away from the mirror and blow out the candle without breaking the connection. Just as I was about to break the gaze, a hand reached out from the glass, pressing against it from the other side. It was my sister's hand, pale and desperate, her fingertips leaving a faint smudge on the mirror's surface. Her mouth opened, but I couldn't hear what she was saying. I closed my eyes, whispered the closing words, and blew out the candle. The room went silent. I sat there for what felt like hours, unable to move, unable to breathe, the memory of her hand reaching for me seared into my mind. When I finally opened my eyes, the mirror was empty, just a plain, cracked piece of glass reflecting my haunted face. I left that room and never looked back. But every now and then, in the dead of night, I catch a glimpse of my sister's handprint on my bathroom mirror, as if she's still reaching out, still trying to find her way back. So if you ever decide to play the reflection game, remember this: no answer is worth what you'll lose. Because once you look into the mirror, a piece of you might stay behind. Forever. That night, I tried to sleep, hoping somehow that rest would dull the horror of what I'd seen. But as I lay in bed, her handprint kept flashing in my mind, as if it were branded behind my eyelids. I kept seeing her face, hollow and pleading, the shadow lurking behind her. And her voice, God, her voice, it felt like it was everywhere, whispering for help in the darkness. It was about 3 in the morning when I heard it again, a faint tapping sound. I shot up in bed, my heart pounding. The room was dark, lit only by the faint glow from the street lamp outside, and the sound was coming from my bathroom. Reluctantly, I got up and opened the door, half expecting to find the room empty. But I was wrong. In the dim reflection of the bathroom mirror, I saw her. She was standing there, her eyes wide and hollow, her hand pressed against the glass, just like before. But now, her mouth was moving, whispering something I couldn't quite make out. A chill washed over me, the air thickening with something unseen but terrifyingly present. Marcus. Her voice echoed softly, faint but unmistakable. I stepped closer, compelled by some force I couldn't explain. I'm here, I whispered, swallowing the lump in my throat. I'm here. What do you need? Her hand pressed harder against the mirror, and the tapping grew louder, like something was beating from the other side, demanding to break free. Her face was twisted in pain, her eyes pleading. And then, for the first time, I heard her words clearly. Come back. Finish the game. The blood drained from my face. I'd thought it was over, that I'd escaped. But now I realized something terrible: once you start the reflection game, there was no leaving it unfinished. Her voice grew louder, filling the room, reverberating inside my skull like an endless echo. Marcus, you have to help me. You have to come back. Please. Finish the game. My instincts screamed to turn away, to run, but there was something in her voice, an ache, a desperation that I couldn't ignore. If I didn't do something, she'd be trapped in that hell forever. And maybe, I realized with a sickening jolt, I'd left a part of myself behind in that mirror too. If I didn't finish, maybe I'd end up just like her. But how could I go back to the game? The mirror I'd used was back in the attic of the antique store. I had no idea if it would even work a second time. As if she could read my mind, her voice whispered again. Softer this time, any mirror will do. As long as you ask the question. And with that, her hand slid down the glass, leaving faint smears that looked disturbingly like claw marks. That was the last time I saw her in that mirror. I went back to my bedroom, barely able to think, let alone sleep. When dawn finally broke, I felt hollow, like a part of me was lost. The day passed in a blur, and as evening fell, my nerves began to fray again. I felt watched, haunted by invisible eyes, and I knew I had to go back. I decided to return to the original mirror, the one in the antique store. I called the owner, explaining that I wanted to buy it, but he hesitated, saying that someone had already placed an offer. I pleaded, begged him to hold it for me, and eventually, he agreed. That night, I went back, heart pounding with each step as I carried the mirror into my room and placed it carefully on the floor. Once again, I lit a candle, feeling the flames flicker and sync with my nervous heartbeat. I knew the rules, they hadn't changed. But this time, I felt more prepared, determined to do whatever it took to finish. I sat down and took a deep breath, clutching a new piece of paper. What happened to my sister? And how can I save her? My voice trembled slightly, but I held firm, repeating the question 3 times. I felt the air thicken around me, growing colder, heavier, as though a dense fog had filled the room. My reflection didn't respond immediately. I stared at myself, watching my own face shift, twisting until it wasn't me at all. The stranger in the mirror grinned, a smile so wide it stretched past the corners of its face, and I felt an icy dread seep into my bones. But this time, I knew what to expect. I didn't look away, even as the reflection's grin grew sharper, teeth long and shadowed. It leaned forward, placing its hand on the glass, and for a fleeting moment, I saw her again. My sister, in the reflection's place, her eyes wide with fear. "Marcus," she whispered, her voice a faint echo. "It's almost here. Hurry." I swallowed hard, keeping my gaze locked on hers. "Tell me what to do," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. The mirror's surface began to ripple, like water disturbed by a pebble, and suddenly I felt myself pulled forward, as if the glass was stretching toward me, wrapping around me, drawing me in. I gasped, feeling myself slip through the surface, into the mirror's cold, shadowed world. The room around me was gone, replaced by an endless void, gray and desolate. The only light came from the flickering candle in my hand, casting an eerie glow that barely illuminated the ground beneath my feet. And then, in the distance, I saw her, my sister, standing alone, her figure silhouetted against the darkness. I ran toward her, my voice breaking as I called out her name. She turned, her eyes filled with a mix of relief and fear. "You came," she whispered, her voice barely audible. But before I could answer, I saw it, a dark figure, lurking just behind her, its shape shifting, indistinct, like a living shadow. It moved with a slow, deliberate grace, its form shifting with each step as if it were made of smoke and ink. I felt a primal fear claw at my insides, a voice in the back of my mind screaming to run. But I couldn't leave her. Not now. "Marcus," she said, her voice filled with urgency. "You have to end it. You have to." The shadow lunged forward, its form expanding, stretching out like blackened tendrils, wrapping around her. She gasped, struggling, her eyes wide with terror. "No," I shouted, reaching out, feeling the cold, suffocating weight of the shadow pressing against me as I fought to pull her free. My hands burned as I touched the tendrils, my skin stinging with a searing cold, but I didn't let go. "Marcus, the mirror," she cried, her voice faint, fading. "Break it. Break the mirror." I turned, realizing what she meant. The only way out, the only way to free her, was to shatter the portal that had brought me here. I scrambled to my feet, clutching the candle as I moved back toward the spot where I'd entered. The reflection loomed before me, and I saw myself in the glass, haunted, desperate, but alive. With all my strength, I slammed the candle against the surface, watching as cracks began to spider across the glass. The world around me trembled, and I heard her scream, a sound so piercing it echoed in my bones. The shadow tightened its grip, and I saw her hand reach out toward me, her fingers trembling as she mouthed her final words, "Thank you." And then, with a deafening crash, the mirror shattered, and the world went dark. When I woke up, I was back in my room, shards of glass scattered around me. My sister's handprint was gone, faded into the fractured remains of the mirror. I sat there, breathing heavily, feeling the weight of what had just happened sink in. She was gone, truly gone, but finally, she was free. To this day, I don't know if what I saw was real, or if it was some twisted manifestation of my own mind. But one thing is clear, the game had given me an answer, in the cruelest way possible. I'd lost her, but at least I'd given her peace. I never touched a mirror again after that night. Because somewhere, deep down, I knew that if I looked long enough, I'd see her there, waiting, watching, her hand reaching out from the other side.